Hello, it is another Tuesday, which means it's time for another in real life video. As I've mentioned in the past several in real life videos, we have moved, just mentioning this again for posterity in case you're just watching this one, either out of order or anything like that, but we have moved recently. We're still unpacking a few things, moving things around mostly. I think for now, this room, we've kind of gotten everything moved around, at least in some semblance of a way that will work, I think. So, aside from, like, you know, minor bits of organization and all of that, and like, tidying things up, a lot of the major pieces of furniture probably in the position where they'll be for the foreseeable future, unless, you know, on some random night at like 2 a.m., it occurs to me, man, what if it looked a different way, right? So, barring that, should mostly be ready to go. Anyway, and as you can see, my partner's desk behind me. Don't look too closely. But nonetheless, it's time for another in real life video, right? This week is another general viewer submit question. As per usual, you can feel free to submit your own question. I have an ever-growing list. I probably should port that list over to like a Google Doc or something. That way it's a lot safer just in case, right? That way it like backs up and all of that. Sort of it exists on the cloud. Right? It'd probably just be like a few kilobytes or whatever. But hey, that's for a different time. Anyway, this week's asks quite simply, let me see here, move this over. The person who submitted the question, who asked it, their username should be somewhere in the bottom third of the screen right about now. They ask quite simply, do you prefer Elder Scrolls or Fallout? A question as old as time. Well, no, not really. A question at least as old as Fallout 3, or the announcement of it since Bethesda acquired them. Obviously, the further back we go, the more different these games get, right? But I presume, and I feel like the general understanding is, when you're asked this question, you mean more contemporary times. At least, like I said, dating back to the eras of Fallout 3, and maybe Oblivion, and going forward from there, when they're all under the same roof, as it were, and sort of the mainline games are created with, I don't know, similar design philosophies, right? Wherein they're both kind of in different ways, some more or less, but for the most part, they're all like sandboxy, like big immersive role-playing games, you know, of this nature, the big sandbox experience, you know, live another life, as it were. So, I definitely do have a preference, and I've talked about it before. I don't know if I've talked about it in real life video before, though I'm sure it's out there somewhere in some form. Don't mistake this, however, as my preference being like, well, I dislike the other one, because that is far from the truth. I believe that is far from it. Still very much enjoy my lesser of the two. Right, and we'll delve into even, like, my silly reason as to why I have the preference anyway. But it's gotta be Elder Scrolls, right? I feel like if you look back at the channel, that much is probably fairly obvious. After all, when I first started, you know, trying to begin a YouTube channel on a more serious level, I started it with Morrowind. I started it with Morrowind Mondays and had sort of like the idea, the plan that, like, well, I like this game so much I could probably just keep playing it forever, every single Monday. And so far, it hasn't failed me yet. It's worked out pretty well. And then, of course, we spun out and we did those Morrowind mechanics video guides, which I'm always thinking, like, man, what if I redid those, right? I'm eternally in a state of mind where it's like, what if I redid them a little bit better and, like, made them quicker, made them present a little bit better, Of course, with new hardware, new mic, new setup, and all of that, and like with a better goal, like with a better plan set out, and just maybe even do it like on its own channel, where it's like the sort of channel where it's like, I don't know, I don't intend to keep making videos on it forever. I set out with a specific goal. This is the sort of channel, like, you know, if I need to, I'll make another video, but there's like definitely a finite amount of things that I could cover on there, right? I don't know. I kind of like the idea of that, but it is definitely an undertaking, you know? Nonetheless, that's too far gone, too far out there. Don't worry about that. As for the preference, of course, there are, although they have plenty of similarities, there are plenty of differences when it comes to Elder Scrolls and Fallout, besides just like the fantasy and like post-apocalyptic sci-fi setting, right? The genre difference, as it were, the setting difference. I do tend to prefer, and this is going to sound kind of wild, but I do really like, and frankly find it kind of unique, the way in which Elder Scrolls lore and story is kind of set up. The way in which, and we've talked about this recently in the Fallout 3 playthrough, I believe, or maybe it was Morrowind. It was one of the two. But the way in which so much of it is not nailed down. There is so much information in Elder Scrolls lore that is vacuous, that is like an interpretation of something that may or may not have even happened. And then from there you spin it out and you have multiple different interpretations wherein they could all be some degree of valid and invalid, right? They could all be correct or incorrect reads. I really enjoy that, and there's very few. I think it's more common in fantasy, but eventually you tend to get answers. And when it comes to Elder Scrolls, I'm kind of down with the idea of like, maybe some of these things we're just never going to get an answer to, right? Like the disappearance of the dwarves and all of that. I'm sure there's, I think either Todd Howard or some other developer has been on the record saying like, yeah, we know internally what happened to them, but we have zero plans to reveal it, right? I'm kind of cool with that. I'm very much down with the idea that like that kind of information may just never get out. True enough that, like I said, there are other settings, certainly in fantasy, where this exists, where there's just unexplained mysteries, things that you never find out, things that are meant to be within the realm of interpretation. But I don't know, I just really enjoy how hard Elder Scrolls kind of leans into that, wherein, you know, you go and read a book in the game, and even ones that have like a more officious tone, they could still be relegated to like propaganda or just someone who is not informed themselves making their own take, right? I like the way in which, and this is really the like the throughput of it, the sort of like main point of it, the core of the idea behind why I like it so much, is because it seems as if it's this long running, and every entry is enormous, every core line entry is enormous, game franchise, series of games, wherein the storyline is so loose, so vacuous, so like able to be molded, that it's kind of all in service of the game itself, right? You have, I can't help but think back to, was it Miyamoto? It was somebody at Nintendo who was talking about, it was a silly interview question. It was something along the lines of, how do you reconcile games like Mario Kart or Mario Party, stuff like that, wherein Mario and Bowser are usually at odds with one another, but sometimes they aren't, right? How does all this work? Is there some sort of cohesive line of thought behind the scenes? And their answer was very cleverly, and I think, frankly, very much sort of in line with Nintendo's, I don't know, target audience, that they think of all the characters as putting on a play, right? So they're all actors. They all have these common tropes, these common ways of like going about, you know, like if an actor gets typecasted or whatever, right? Something along those lines. They all have these characteristics about them, and every game is like a play, right? They fulfill a different role. They fulfill a different character. They are a character, but they're fulfilling like a different type of character within each story, within each game, mechanically or narratively or whatever, you know, narratively in a Mario game or whatever, but you get the idea, hopefully. I find Elder Scrolls to be not too far off from that, wherein, right, if you put enough distance, enough time between different entries, as we had seen very clearly between Oblivion and Skyrim, there's just enough storyline there to where you can kind of make anything happen, right? You could feasibly see a world of possibilities, and all those possibilities can kind of work together to formulate, I don't know, an interesting setting for a game, right? And it's all familiar trappings, right? You've always got your 9, possibly 8 divines and all of that. You've got your Daedric princes. You've got your various factions. You've got your different like races and all of that you can play as. I don't know. I very much like that. I like the freeform way of it. I find it to be not unique, but perhaps maybe unique, like I said, in the sense that Elder Scrolls just really leans into it a ton. In particular, like Morrowind does such a fantastic job at it of just making everything sort of open to interpretation in that, oh, this is a source of information from this one faction, but you know, the player, you perhaps not even on your first playthrough, but you may know something else about this faction that sort of colors that information in a different way and makes you think, well, maybe this is a little unreliable or whatever, right? I don't know. I just love how, I don't know, mysterious, how not nailed down it is. And I've remarked on this before that this is very difficult for something sci-fi to do, because I think, like in Fallout, something that is a type of science fiction, I think the closer you get to like hard space sci-fi or whatever, the more you land, or the more you get to it requiring solid answers, right? I think there is inexplicably something about science fiction where the people who read or watch or listen or whatever you do to it, there is an expectation that there is some sort of answer, right? That the answers should be out there. It's probably due to the science part, but one of the things I posited not long ago, I think maybe this was in a Starfield video, but I couldn't help but wonder, like ages ago, Gene Roddenberry, sort of like creator behind Star Trek originally, ages ago, right, with the original series and the Next Generation, would put out these sorts of faux manuals that would explain sort of his idea of the workings behind a lot of the technology, right? Like you could pick up a book that was put out in some sort of official capacity that like explained, oh, this is, yeah, the USS Enterprise, this is how all of it functions. This is all of the different decks and all of that. This is the rough science that we have behind it. This is how like the replicator works, all that kind of junk, right? And I can't help but wonder if maybe that set up an expectation in audiences, in like broader culture, for people to think, well, if it's science fiction, there should be some explanation to it, which I think on a certain level, I don't think there needs to be. However, when you are making something in that realm, in the realm of science fiction, within that setting, I think there is also, although you don't have to, I think there is an understanding that, like, yeah, a lot of people in the audience are kind of expecting answers to it, unless we telegraph really early on that there is at least one big mystery that will never get answered, right? But otherwise, a lot of the other stuff should feel in some way explicable, right? Not inexplicable, but explicable. I don't even know if that's a word, but it sounds right. Whereas fantasy doesn't really have that, though. Fantasy, like I said, does tend to answer a lot of stuff. But like I said, Elder Scrolls is so keen on being so like weird and vacuous and having each game sort of stand kind of on its own. And it feels very much like its own experience in that sense, in that you can move around the story in such a way. And that may just be because the last two main entries were Skyrim and Oblivion, which feel like worlds apart, even though they were only a few years apart. But yeah, that's, I think, a big reason why. But perhaps the truest reason why, right? That's me sort of like trying to get down to the bottom of it and think like, why do I have this preference, right? Is there like a good, reasonable explanation why I would have this preference? And that's sort of the answer I arrive at there. But perhaps the more realistic answer for my preference, the more realistic reason for my preference, is a little stupid, frankly. It's not well considered. It's not like super thought out or anything like that. It's not like I was mulling over this or whatever, but like I said, certainly it is something I mull over from now and again, especially making so many videos about these games. The sort of stupid reason being I have a lot of nostalgia for Elder Scrolls, right? I played Morrowind when I was in middle school on my Xbox console, right? I have a lot of like internal connection or tie to Morrowind and to Elder Scrolls as a whole, right? It's kind of been there throughout a lot of my life, and although they're very different in many ways, like I said, there's various similar trappings, and you can kind of trace the arc throughout, I don't know, life, your own life, as it were. And like I said, it just kind of, it got its hooks into me at an early age, as some would say, right? And I'm sure a lot of folks have, various games and stuff like that where you kind of inexplicably just like this thing, and maybe the most guilty admission is that it's for a stupid reason, just like, yeah, I got into it at a young age, I kind of never got out of it, right? Like, I know for some folks, it's like the Halo games, right? Even if there's a bad Halo game that comes out, you're kind of down to try it. There's folks who are like that about Pokemon. Pokemon is a huge one, right? That's probably the best example, wherein you kind of get into Pokemon as a kid, very likely. I think it's really rare to get into Pokemon exclusively as an adult, but I'm sure it happens. Regardless, you get into it as like a kid, a teenager, or whatever. You play the game, maybe you watch the anime, or you get into the card game, all sorts of stuff, right? And then that sort of carries on to adulthood, right? You kind of still have a fondness for it. You still kind of enjoy it to some degree, whether that be like just super casual, you check it out every now and again, or you're still super duper into the games, right? And you're like, yeah, I get that I'm not exactly in the target audience for this anymore, but I still kind of like it, right? I would say it's not too far removed from that, right? Wherein your sort of enjoyment of it is, for better or worse, in some ways intrinsically tied to the nostalgia of it, right? Yeah, I don't know. I have to wonder, would I be more critical of like Elder Scrolls and all of that, and be like, perhaps even of like Bethesda Game Studios, if they didn't make like one of my favorite games during my most formative like teenage years and all of that, right? I have to wonder, but alas, this is kind of the situation in which I have found myself, right? This is kind of just where I'm at. Like I said, I will fully admit that it's kind of stupid, right? I regularly say that I tend to like all BGS games, whether they're good or bad. They're big ones that play in a similar ilk, right? I liked and put in a ton of hours into Fallout 76, even at launch. Same goes for Starfield. I just wrapped up Shattered Space And a lot of people do not like Shattered Space. It's got to be said. But I loved Shattered Space. I'm a problem. I will fully admit that I'm a complete freak about this. I think that's maybe the better way to go about it when you're sort of, I don't know, taking on a somewhat public, I don't know, public, when you're being seen by the public in some way, right? Just know that I kind of like them probably more than I ought to, more than is better for me, right? I just think they're neat, right? It's kind of an issue, maybe, but I don't know. I think you can take it or leave it. I feel as if in knowing that, okay, I'm watching this person or I'm listening to this person who I know kind of has this unabashed love of this specific IP or whatever, right? Anything. It doesn't just have to be an IP or whatever. But I'm aware of that. And thus, that I won't mind. If anything, you could see like, oh, this is kind of endearing or whatever. I get where they're coming from. It's not for me, but I get it, right? I think so long as you've kind of telegraphed that, you're pretty much, you're going to be safe, right? I think it's A-okay, you know? I think the only issue is when there's someone who just like, I don't know, lacks that degree of like emotional intelligence to understand where someone else is coming from, right? That might be it. And someone's just like, but why do you like this or whatever, you know, if that makes any sense. But yeah, long story short, I like I like the Elder Scrolls more than Fallout, mostly due to probably nostalgia, right? There's ways in which I could try and examine on like a higher level of detail why it is that I like it over the other. But I don't know. There can't be helped, right? Can't be helped. Perhaps if in my formative teenage years I played Fallout 3 instead, maybe it would be the other way around, which, make no mistake, I really do like Fallout. Like I said just a bit ago, played so much Fallout 76. I played it on the Bethesda launcher, which doesn't even exist now, so you can't even see how many hours I've got unless I'm like directly logged into that character, which, man, I need to get back into it. There's been so many updates that I would love to like mess around with since I last was playing it, right? But like I said, I kind of haven't touched it really at all since Starfield dropped it, right? Which, like I said, I'm a problem, right? It's bad. It's bad. But that said, I don't know. Perhaps I'm some sort of freak who I just can't help myself, right? But you know, what can you do? The human condition, as it were. But I think that ought to do it, right? That's my silly, stupid reason as to why I have a preference for Elder Scrolls over Fallout. Like I said, I don't dislike Fallout at all. If anything, I probably like it more than most in the sense that I kind of like all of them, CRPGs included, all of the mainline entries, and 76, the spinoff, right? I quite enjoy them all in different ways, right? Some of those are very different games from one another, but I appreciate them nonetheless in their own way, right? And goodness, I can't wait until not only our New Vegas replaythrough here coming up, but the second season of the TV show, which who knows when that'll be. I would guess next year, but maybe this year, maybe late this year. Maybe they'll set it up to come out around like October 23rd. You know how it is. All right. Oh, and by the way, God, I almost forgot. I don't know how much I'm allowed to say about this, but have we all been seeing that news, that Oblivion news, that Elder Scrolls Oblivion news? Y'all been seeing some of that? Right? We've talked about this before, right? When those Microsoft court documents kind of leaked out, right? There was some very official stuff in, I don't know, I think I'm on the record saying that like it's only a matter of time unless they cancel it all, which seems pretty unlikely from where we're standing, right? Sounds like there's going to be something popping off later this year, maybe in summer, right? Very, very much looking forward to that. Definitely clearing my calendar for it, as it were. All right. That ought to do it. If you don't know what the hell I was talking about, I implore you to look that up. If you like Elder Scrolls, if you're an Elder Scrolls freak like me, probably look into that. Wink. That ought to do it for now. Until next time, please take care of each other.